Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Neighborhood Conversations, where we welcome diverse individuals who are doing amazing things in communities, organizations that are really amazing in Nova Scotia. And we have the amazing opportunity to interview Annika Voltan, Executive Director at Impact Organizations of Nova Scotia, also known as IONS. I am so excited to get to have a chat with Annika today. We're going to dive into community conversations and develop more knowledge. Annika, it's such a pleasure to have you on this conversation today. How are you?
I'm great, and thanks for having me. It's been a long time coming.
I know it's been a long time. We haven't seen each other since summer, and so it's really good that we get to actually have a conversation in this light and also get to learn more about ions. And so I want to deep dive into the conversation now, and first of all, get to know who you are, and also talk a little bit about what is ions. Yeah.
Sure. So, do you want me to start with myself? A little bit of
Yeah, start with
background?
yourself and then go along with ions. Yeah, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So, um, where do I start? I live in Shabuktuk in Halifax, and I grew up here. I was one of the many people who moved away many times and come back, and now I very much call this province home. And I had, I think, a windy journey getting to the social impact sector. I have three business degrees. I started out in commerce and did an MBA, and then eventually a PhD focusing on social enterprise. And I spent time in the early days of my career working in corporate environment. I explored working with my dad in the home construction industry, and I worked in different levels of government. So I worked on climate policy with the federal government and also in different departments in Nova Scotia. And then finally, I'd always had an interest in environmental and social issues, and that kind of led me to go back to school that last final time and really lean into the world of social innovation and networks and social enterprise. And then it was just kind of serendipity, an opportunity opened up, and somebody I used to work with asked if I might be interested in exploring. That led to me becoming an executive director of a nonprofit, and that was about 7 years ago. I helped to found an organization called Inspiring Communities here in Nova Scotia. And then 3 years ago, I moved over to what was then the Community Sector Council of Nova Scotia, and we've since rebranded to become IONS.
This is that's definitely innovation in itself, and also inspiring at the same time, which is really good. I want to ask you a quick question. What does social innovation mean to you when it comes down to the to impact and community? Yeah, yeah.
Great question. And I think for me, social innovation is really rooted in systems change and relationships, but it's essentially about finding new ways of connecting, working together, and identifying solutions for solving the complex problems that we're facing.
Yeah, that's totally so key, and it's sometimes it's hard. Well, is it hard to build relationships? It depends, right? It depends.
I think it's hard. It's easy and
Yeah,
hard.
yeah, yeah.
But inevitably there's hard aspects that emerge. So it's more about leaning into those sometimes.
Yeah, and sometimes community, it's hard to get feedback from community, and sometimes it's easy to get feedback from community. Can you discuss a time when community's feedback significantly influenced the direction of your organization or the outcome of a specific project that you worked on that positively went well? Yeah, let's talk about that.
Sure. And I'm going to guess that there are some folks listening who have no idea what IONS is or what we
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, let's go back to that question too.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll just give a little bit of info at a high level. So our work is really about helping to connect organizations, help to develop capacity of people, and raise awareness of the needs and priorities and challenges of what we call the community impact sector. So a
Right,
lot of our work focuses on nonprofits and charities, voluntary groups, nonprofit social enterprises, but essentially those groups of people out there who are working toward some kind of positive community impact.
right,
And so we do lots of different things. We host learning events, we host networking events, we do research, we spend time kind of advocating with government or media or whatever to do that work. And so I think, when I was reflecting on this question about how has community impacted or how has the voice of community impacted what we do, and
right.
Templeton, you were on our board while we were developing this
Yeah,
strategy, but over the last year or so, we really took a deep dive into what are we really about at our core, and how do we want to reframe our strategy and our priorities as an organization.
right,
And I think where we've landed is a lot about the fact that we're living through an extremely challenging time for many different reasons, and the status quo is just not serving us. And so there are many aspects about that, and of course, very central are the inequities that are so embedded in our systems and our ways of being. And so we're really interested in, what does a different future, a different way of working, different systems look like, and we want to play as much as we can a role in helping to stimulate ideas and thinking and connections to kind of bridge from the now to a better future.
right.
And so about 4 years ago, maybe now, the Community Sector Council, which is what we were called before, was engaging in a number of different kinds of capacity building initiatives, but it had kind of lost its way a little bit in terms of focus and really being clear to people about what the focus was. And so around the time that COVID hit, there was an intention to do what's referred to as a decolonization learning journey. And it was going to be, I believe, an in-person learning journey. And because of COVID, it turned into a series of webinars that were really led by and held by the Mi'kmaq community in Unama'ki. And I think I'm bringing this up because there was such an incredible response to that initiative. Like during COVID, there were hundreds of people from across the country even who tuned in to go along that virtual learning journey. And then after that, we did something similar about the history of African Nova Scotians and Black communities in Nova Scotia, called the Black History Learning Journey. And then more recently, we've done a queer learning journey. And because of the work that was done and the relationships that were formed, that work and centering equity and justice really became a defining element of the IONS identity and the work that we do. So I think that's an example of how, the interest, the fact that people showed up, that there's clearly a gap out there in terms of learning opportunities, was a kind of a defining moment for the organization. And we've had other examples too, like, we hear over and over that burnout is a really big issue in the sector. So we've offered learning and connecting spaces around that. We've heard that recruitment and retention is a really big issue. So we've recently launched a Beyond Decent Work campaign to lean into that. So we're always trying to be responsive.
Wow, that's really amazing that you're being more so all these topics. are so important, especially the one on finding that balance of burnout and connecting, and then also bringing um, having diverse cultural and gender-based sessions. One, to educate community, but also to hear feedback from what they want and what they want to see in the nonprofit sector. And I've been in the nonprofit sector for quite a while now. I feel I've been jumping in different areas. What are like some advice you would give to nonprofit sectors who are going into this work of community impact, and also who's going into this work just to get feedback from community? Because I feel that sometimes nonprofits say that they're getting feedback from community, but they target their community partners, who they would define as community. Who, yeah. I have part two of this question. Who is the community, that how do they define the community that they're serving, but also how do they be intentional in getting those feedback? Yeah.
I look forward to my family's security in the future. That's the main goal as a father.
The empowerment from changing careers has really just made me want to get out of bed in the morning.
I'm looking forward to growing my business. So I want to hire people like I was hired. I want to give guys that chance.
Il me fera plaisir de continuer à travailler avec les immigrants francophones en Nouvelle-Écosse.
I'm looking forward to the financial freedom that I never had before.
Yeah, those are good questions. How do you define the community that you're serving? I think, for IONS, it's fairly clear and very broad. Like it's mostly organizations and people working and volunteering in those organizations. For a nonprofit that is focused on a particular social issue, say the housing crisis, then that becomes a little bit more challenging and maybe requires some thought around: is it a geographic focus? Is it a particular community that is more vulnerable that you're focusing on? Is it an age group? Is it anyone who is experiencing homelessness? But really, I think it's an important question to be intentional about as you're establishing your organization's mission, and really making sure that once you are clear about who it is that you're serving, that you're engaging them intentionally. And I may be reading between the lines a little bit in terms of how you phrase the question, but I do think that maybe for historical reasons and sometimes problematic ways of working in the nonprofit and charitable sector, we can tend to be blind to or ignore certain community groups. And so I think in terms of, you mentioned being intentional and really getting a better sense of kind of who's out there, whether it's local Indigenous communities, local newcomer communities, Black communities, people living with different mental illnesses or disabilities, that there isn't too naive of an assumption that you're serving everybody that's affected by the issue you're trying to address.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, I currently co-founded an organization, which I will not share until we launch out. Where we're in the conversations right now, in defining the demographic of who we're serving and making sure that we're being intentional, not just to broaden the context, because we want to make sure that we're really intentional of that narrowing down focus, which is really important. And it goes down to that community engagement piece, which is my next question. How do you define a little bit of the inclusivity and the diversity and community engagement efforts to address the needs to all of your stakeholders who are involved and stuff like that? Because sometimes inclusivity and diversity is sometimes missed, or sometimes it's put in different contexts and saying, oh, we're a DEI organization, but we're not being intentional in that way of saying, okay, we hire someone, so that's our DEI community engagement approach. How do we get into that type of work? Yeah, and what does IONS do?
Yeah, I know, like we were just talking a little bit about relationships, and I think I can't stress enough the importance of the relational element of this work, and especially in relation to diversity and inclusion. It's a journey that will be lifelong for me and for IONS, and we've been really intentional and vocal about the fact that we prioritize diversity and are trying to create an inclusive space within the organization, but also hopefully to share our stories and our experiences and what we've learned to inspire others to come along this journey with us. And so I think, it starts with the recruitment process. But I think that really it starts before that, because you need to have relationships, and you need to know how to connect with different communities in a way that goes beyond posting a job online, for example. And I think in order to really develop those relationships and develop credibility and trust, it takes time. It takes like showing up over and over. It takes humility and admitting when you've made mistakes, and also being reliable and not shying away from hard conversations, and being willing to come back to things when maybe they don't feel good. So it's, I say that because I think until we really are in a better place from just human to human, then it's really hard for organizations to really, really, truly be welcoming and inclusive. And I guess just a few things that IONS is doing, like we have shared a lot of this on our website, so you can check it out at ions.ca. But around our hiring processes, we do things like we share our interview questions and our process upfront and in transparent ways. We make sure that salaries are posted along with our job descriptions. We pay honoraria for people who do interviews with us. We do reverse reference checks. So not only do we collect references from the people that we're interviewing, but we also offer the opportunity for them to check references on us. And even little things like being clear about comfortable clothing or changing the lighting in the space or things like that. So I definitely can't take credit for all of this. I think another piece here is that, we do have a fairly diverse team, and listening to those folks and what they've experienced as needs for themselves and putting those into the different processes that we implement. So I've learned a lot about neurodivergence, for example, and anxiety, and, thinking about those things from an accessibility lens as well. And so, I think there's a lot of different things we're experimenting with, and we're it's hard. We hired somebody, been working with her now for a few years, but we have a coach that we work with, and her area of expertise is on generative conflict. Wow. And I really think that is at the root of a lot of equity and justice work, is how comfortable are we with being held accountable and having hard conversations and being honest with each other.
Wow, that's really important. And I really like the approach that IONS is doing, especially what stood out to me just now in this conversation is the part where the reference part, where you're also sharing references with the person who you're interviewing. That's something that most organizations doesn't do. And I feel like that's like worthy. Also the process of the interview. I think that that's something that really struck out. I actually I said this a lot in previous meetings and encounters with other nonprofit organizations where sometimes their interview process is not like inclusive, or sometimes they're not welcoming for follow-up questions, or being able to deepen into the knowledge. And I found that to be an issue where I got a response from another individual say, oh, well, if we do a follow-up question for one, we have to do it for all. But yeah, sure. If you want to do it for all, do it for all. Like, it's really a process of getting to know the person, and also don't be too strict with the questions that you create, but being open to getting to know the individual, which gives them more of that engagement to hire the right person and to get to know the real story of that individual and their passion. So yeah, really, really important. Yeah. Wow. Annika, this has been like so good. And I want to ask, when it comes down to different communication strategies, and I know Ions share a lot on their social media, which I love, which has great content. Like, what is the role that your technology and social media play in community engagement strategies, and how do they evolve over time? Because I've seen like so many topics that you shared, that some of your team has shared, but also on the Ions page as well. Like, how do you keep that going? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I shared a little bit about what we do as an organization, and I think that is partly why we have such a great and strong communications team, because a big part of our role is to listen and engage and then amplify voices. So social media and our newsletter are a big way that we do that. And it has definitely grown and evolved in the 3 years that I've been at Ions. And I think actually in the last 3 years, the organization hired its first comms person. So, and now we have a team of 4. So, but I think, you know, something we're experimenting with right now is, you know, there's so many different issues in this sector. You could talk about, you know, volunteerism and governance and funding and HR issues and many, many things, many different topics. And we get asked to provide input on or provide resources about so many different things. So it became overwhelming. And we decided that we wanted to try to focus our external communications more intentionally. So this is the first time, just in the last couple of months, that we've kind of described it as a campaign effort. So we've launched our Beyond Decent Work campaign, and it's really focused on helping folks to develop and nurture inclusive and welcoming workspaces. And so it's that first part of the recruitment phase of bringing in new team members. So we're doing things like, you know, we've been wanting to do policy briefs, and we call them possibility briefs, to try to highlight, here's the data that we have, and here's what people need to know. And then we've also included in those calls to action. And I think that's what we're really excited about, is how can we use social media and other ways of external communications to mobilize the sector, as well as to connect the sector and provide information that they can then use to make change in their organizations. So recently we shared out our salary scales. Felt a little vulnerable doing that, but I've had several EDs from different nonprofits here reach out and say just how valuable it was, because we do aim to pay at or above kind of industry average. And so they've been able to take those to their board and advocate for pay raises for their teams. And some have been successful doing that. So,
wow, that's really amazing and inspiring. I admire Ions a lot. And that's the reason why I continue to stay connected with the work that you folks do, because of the openness and the dialogue that you have within your team from the board level, and also with other communities in that sort. So I commend you on the work that you're doing. Before we go, I always try to invite a tip or a quote or a message of hope that's going to help inspire our nonprofit sector organization and charitable sector organizations to create action in this work that they're going into community engagement? What do you have for us?
You're putting me on the spot here.
Yeah, so what's the spot question?
I don't know if I can pull out a quote that fast, but
Yeah.
I think I really think it's about moving beyond, reimagining, challenging the status quo. I think this is a sector, as I'm still fairly new to it, but I just see so much evidence of we do it this way because it's how it's always been done versus it actually needing to be done that way. So I really think this is the time for us to break out out of those past behaviors.
The time is now. I really agree with that. And thank you so much again, Annika. Annika, it's always good to have you on here. And folks listening, audience listening, I hope that you take some great knowledge because we're going to invite you back on. I feel like there needs to be a part 2 of this conversation because the nonprofit sector needs growth and knowledge. And what you shared today is definitely a huge resource that can help nonprofits go through a longer way, and also helping other board members who listen to this podcast to give them a clearer perspective of other approaches and stuff like that. So thank you so much for coming on to the conversation
Thanks for
today. Yeah. Audience, thank you so much for listening to us, and I hope to see you at our next episode. Have a great day. Until next time. This podcast is funded by the Government of Nova Scotia.